From a frankly scary amount of playing with literal fire for the sake of a scene, to a glut of sweet treats being discarded in response to real-life events, these extravagant film feats were ultimately all for nothing. I'm Gareth from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 times movies went to extreme lengths for scenes that didn't make the cut. Number 10. Dr. Strangelove. 2,000 pies were destroyed for nothing. Were it not for the assassination of a certain president of the United States, we would most definitely be living in a world where one of the greatest satires ever forged ended with the mother of all custard pie fights. However, said taking of JFK's life did come to pass, so a scene that came at a substantial financial cost did not. Or at least it did not make an appearance in the finished article. This was largely due to a line in the scene involving US General Buck Turgidson screaming out, "Our beloved president has been infamously struck down by a pie in the prime of his life. Are we gonna let that happen? Massive retaliation!" Hitting a little too close to home. The sequence itself, involving various world leaders coming to blows with the help of some custard delights, was all completely shot, with a whopping 2,000 Fortnum and Mason pies being dragged onto the soundstage to hurl at the actors' pleasure. It's estimated that this huge set piece cost somewhere in the region of $2 million to film, as the actual destruction of desserts took between 1 to 2 weeks to get in the can. Luckily, fans of the feature were treated to images of the infamous pie finale years later. Despite the sheer amount of wasted dough though, it's hard to argue with the studio's thought process in pressuring for Stanley Kubrick to rid the shot from his picture. Number 9. The Wizard of Oz. A dance 5 weeks in the making is chopped. When your presenter throws the words jitterbug into the mix, your mind likely wanders off to the pleasant sight of the late George Michael having a little jig. However, if not for the decision being made to cut a sizable chunk out of the eventual classic that would go on to be The Wizard of Oz, there's every chance Wham would have had some significant competition on the jitterbug pop culture stage. The deleted scene in question would have involved Dorothy, the Lion, the Tin Man, and the Scarecrow all being stung by the dreaded blue and pink mosquito-esque jitterbug, an act that would result in them having no choice but to bust out dance moves for 6 minutes straight. This also took a mind-blowing 5 weeks to rehearse for, costing around $1 million when adjusted for inflation, only to be thrown out altogether alongside an unwanted subplot during the editing process. It's said that a major reason for the aforementioned sequence and narrative detour being chopped from the eventual hit was due to the film's substantial length. But have no fear, you can still find the song on YouTube and traumatize yourselves to death. Number 8. The Goonies. An expensive octopus is sliced. Sometimes, despite your best efforts and having equally positive intentions, certain scenes are just not destined for the big screen. That undoubtedly applies to the all-out monstrosity that was the infamous octopus scene eventually culled from Richard Donner's all-time classic, The Goonies, when it came to its theatrical release. In case you're unaware, this exchange would have seen the gang having to battle a giant mass of tentacles as they escaped the Fratellis, seeing off the creature by cramming a Walkman down its throat that then led to this bad boy boogieing away from the youngsters. Unsurprisingly, the scene wasn't exactly an instant hit with all involved, with Sean Astin in particular not being a fan. In short, the 32-foot puppet that was supposedly a nightmare to maneuver and operate looked horrendous from the get-go, with its huge exposed cables meaning it looked like an anything but legit living thing. That being said, the scene was actually restored to Disney Channel versions of the flick at a later date, meaning this octopus did ultimately manage to suck its way into a few nightmares in the end. Best not to show Astin though, I suppose. Number 7. Star Wars Episode 3: Revenge of the Sith. Anakin and Obi-Wan go for a paddle. In all honesty, there's a whole host of deleted Star Wars scenes which unfortunately didn't make the cut that must have been an absolute nightmare to shoot. Yet few hold a candle to the wet and wild action Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen got up to during the third prequel flick that still didn't find a way to splash into the big screen spectacle. On top of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker taking a plunge into some liquid aboard a separatist spacecraft being chopped from the flick, a great deal of time must have been dedicated to digitally rendering some still not complete, but all the same fairly advanced, CGI used to kill off another Jedi earlier in the film opening sequence. Between deeply cringeworthy dialogue and the overall feeling of time being wasted, it's little surprise this scene was deemed worthless enough to bin. But the real question is how someone didn't realize that before any of the CGI-heavy damp squib was shot in the first place. Number 6. Gangster Squad. A pivotal shootout is scrapped after real-life cinema shooting. As we've noted already on this list, sometimes an elaborate scene can work perfectly fine in the lead-up to a project being released onto the world, only for a tragic real-world incident to seriously alter the end product. Hot on the heels of an horrendous shooting taking place in a cinema theater around the time of the release of The Dark Knight Rises in 2012, Ruben Fleischer's Gangster Squad suddenly found itself in a precarious position. That's because this gangster thriller set in 1949 contained a notable scene involving a particularly gnarly shootout inside of the Grauman's Chinese Theater in Hollywood. Despite already airing sections of this grand display of violence, which must have taken a significant time to shoot, in TV spots and trailers for the flick, the decision was made to hold off on releasing the Ryan Gosling starring picture, so appropriate reshoots could be captured and infused into the feature. A subsequent shootout in Chinatown was eventually used instead, but that still didn't do the star-studded flop any favors at the box office, with Gangster Squad only making a weak $100 million on a $75 million budget. Number 5. Blue Velvet. Flaming nipples are too much of a good thing. Not for the last time in this glorious collection of scenes that weren't destined for the final cut, here's a moment when a performer was made to feel the burn for real, only for all that scorching hard work to be left on the cutting room floor. For an age, avid fans of David Lynch's captivating neo-noir Blue Velvet had been clamoring for the sections of the tale that were discarded in order to produce a more slick 2-hour cut. It may have taken a while, but said deleted scenes were finally discovered by an MGM tech known as Darren Gross, revealing a moment that Lynch himself had assumed was lost forever. Coming during a scene which saw Frank threaten a dude chilling with a bunch of barely clothed women in a bar, the director's self-professed fave sequence involved one of said ladies literally lighting her nipples on fire. This was a trick she'd skillfully learned over the years, and offered up for the shoot, something Lynch was all too happy to take her up on. When asked why this favorite scene wasn't included in the theatrical cut, Lynch simply responded it was too much of a good thing. And you know what? He may just have a point. Number 4. Batman. Sean Young gets recast after injuring herself practicing for a horse riding sequence. As far back as 3 decades ago, finding yourself lining up alongside Batman and the rest of Gotham's citizens was still seen as a potential career maker. So you do have to feel for Sean Young, who, after picking up some serious on-screen momentum in films like Blade Runner and Dune, had her chance to step into the Batverse stripped away from her. With an earlier version of Tim Burton's 1989 Batman feature possessing a few sequences involving horse riding, Young was tasked with sharpening her horseback skills whilst prepping for the shoot in London. This dedication to ensuring she looked the part on the animal eventually resulted in the one-time Vicky Vale actor being launched from up high, landing right on her arm and breaking it in the process. Instead of simply waiting for Young's arm to heal and possibly even just shooting around it for a spell, Kim Basinger was brought in as an instant replacement. Adding literal insult to injury, the moment that put Young on the sidelines in the first place ultimately wasn't even deemed worthy enough for a spot in the game-changing back flick at all. Number 3. Taking lives. A rare truck is destroyed for an eventually deleted scene. Though next to nobody would ever turn down the chance to see a stunt supremely executed on the big screen, the cost of committing these often explosive or destructive moments to a feature can often be quite high, which must make the decision to actually pull an expensive sequence from a finished cut that bit more difficult to swallow. Now, factor in the act of thoroughly pulverizing a ridiculously rare set of items for the sake of a scene not fit for purpose, and you find yourself in the unenviable position that director DJ Caruso was in while shooting the Angelina Jolie starring Taking Lives in the early 2000s. Jolie's character of FBI agent Elena Scott was captured driving an old truck back to her home in the fateful scene, with a tree branch then tumbling from up high and smashing through her windshield. Because drama. As the scene took a good few takes to get in the can, the production managed to destroy all of the available versions of this type of windshield in North America for the shot. And the reward for ridding the states of this particular windscreen? Nothing but a place on this lovely list. Number 2. Joker. Extreme bathtub scene goes too far for Warner Brothers. For a movie that seemingly pulled very few punches along the way, it comes as a bit of a surprise to hear that there were actually some even more extreme and shocking Joker moments that weren't even given the chance to see the light of day in Todd Phillips' 2019 character study. On top of the many unsettling and gripping visuals brought into existence for the flick, including masterful improvised dances and shell-shocking murders, Phillips has revealed that an insane bathtub scene also very nearly made it into the cut. However, the director has confessed that it would have been hard to slip the amazing moments into the movie, mostly due to the film's R rating. Phillips also had to navigate his way through Warner Brothers' various hoops, admitting that he was on the receiving end of emails reminding him, "You realize we sell Joker pajamas at Target, right?" Number 1. Bruce Almighty. Steve Carell is set on fire. In what was pretty much Steve Carell's first real appearance in a motion picture, the eventual Office star was thrown right in the deep end with a stunt involving his news anchor, Evan Baxter, being tormented and tortured by Jim Carrey's god power-possessing Bruce Nolan. Though the scene itself wasn't outright cut from the movie, there was a moment seen as a little too extreme in hindsight. Along with making Evan's nose bleed profusely, Carell recounted that his head was also burst into flames, something that was achieved with no digital effects. But the movie makers thought it was too mean of him to do as a character. In Carell's own words, "They ran a gas line down my back and they put a coil on top of my head. They put gel on my head so it wouldn't burn and they ignited this enormous 4-foot flame." At least the terrifying sequence wasn't completely lost forever, with it popping back up in the movie's DVD extras. But this likely wasn't what the actor had in mind when he set out to light the movie world on fire. Ha, I'm gonna go.